Thank you everybody for coming. My name is Walter Edwards. I'm the director of the Humanities Center. I'm absolutely delighted to join, to welcome to the podium today my friend and colleague, old friend of the Humanities Center, not old biologically, but in terms of having a long association with the Humanities Center. She has been person who has always allowed her great reputation to be associated with the center in our programs. And when she is not actually participating in a program, she would give me advice and encourage the center to do its work. So I'm delighted to welcome her. And you will note that she's had an extraordinarily successful academic career until she retired, but the retirement has not prevented her from working. She's continuing to work, as you will see in this little short introduction I'm about to read. I want to let you know that she is Jorgelina Corbatta Wing. She was born in Argentina. She got her licenciatura in philosophy and lectures from the Universidad Nacional del Sur. She has a master's and PhD in Hispanic literatures from the University of Pittsburgh. She's now emerita professor of Latin American literature and ex-director of women's studies here at Wayne. She has taught courses in contemporary narrative and film, Latin American literature and culture, women's studies, literature and psychoanalysis at universities in Argentina, Colombia, and United States. And during her sabbaticals, she has been a visiting professor at universities in Sweden, France, Belgium, Austria, and Chile. She has a second career as an academic analyst and as an academic associate faculty at the Michigan Psychoanalytical Institute. She has published 6 books on literary criticism and more than 100 articles in peer-reviewed journals. In addition, she's currently looking for a publisher for a manuscript almost completed entitled Fiction, Autofiction, and Intertextuality. She's been a Fulbright Scholar in Columbia in 2004 and has received several awards for papers on Cortázar, Manuel Mejia, Vallejo, Roberto Bolaño, and IPA Ipso International Psychoanalytic Award for her paper entitled The Quest for and the Denial of Intimacy in Luisa Valenzuela's Dark Desires and Others. She got that in 2017. Also, she has received several awards from Wayne State University. Her other publications in her new professional direction include an imaginary dialogue between Gloria and Aldua and Julia Kristeva, which was published in Hispanica in 2024, entitled Sexuality, Normative and Social Terror, XXY and Lucia Penzio, and so on. So she has done an enormous amount of work. I can go on and on mentioning her work both in English and in Spanish, in literary criticism and psychoanalysis. But I want to leave as much time as possible for her to give her presentation. Today, her talk is going to be entitled Some Reflections About the World We Are Living In, Entries from My Diary from February 2020 to February 2021. So thank you once again, Professor Corbatta Wing, and I now turn the floor over to you to give your presentation.
Well, thank you very much, Walter. Even though I retired in May 2017, I feel like I never retire because, as you said, I continue working, and because, as always, Humanity Center has been home. And as Humanity Center is you, you have been my frequent host. Thank you very much. Okay. Do I start?
Yes.
Okay. We have gone through a quarantine life situated in unmapped territories and new time dimensions. Never before we have experienced a pandemic like COVID-19 with its corollaries of extreme vulnerability, fear of dying, isolation, uncertainty, accompanied by new perceptions of our own body and new different ways of interacting with others. It is also true that what the French call l'écriture de moi has proliferated during these times. Autobiography, autofiction, autobiographical novels, self-portraits in painting, drawing, personal performances and diaries, and many other forms of personal expression seem to be the best way of representing and communicating our current experience of being in the world. Also, that pendular movement of remembering and forgetting, of going back to the past, our personal, reconstructed past, in the middle of the unknown, is a good exercise to preserve our sense of identity and mental sanity. Those who have read my work or attended my classes' presentations have heard me more than once quoting Ricardo Piglia's statement, the Argentinian writer Ricardo Piglia, literary criticism is the modern form of autobiography. For quite a while now, I have been moving from literary criticism to the autobiographical mode. The purpose, as Dr. Edwards read in the subtitle of this talk, is to share with you some entries of my diary, real diary and some virtual diary, and also to refer to two books that have been inspirational, Sadie Smith, Intimations, and Zizek, Pandemic, COVID-19 Shakes the World, both of 2020. We are living in a strange world under the threat of a new and lethal virus that could put all of us in a state of isolation, increasing inner conflicts, but also challenging us to use all of our resources in order to overcome them. This is a situation about which we have no previous experience, knowledge, or memory. We need thus to improvise and to be creative. Also, we are just coming out of a political regime that for many of us revived past ghosts of dictatorship, social chaos, and injustice. In addition, both pandemics, the physical and the political, have provoked a crisis that, like opening Pandora's box, let free racism, xenophobia, misogyny, and homophobia, with its culmination in the violence that took place January the 6. What about the sound? It works well? Okay. In spite of Einstein's revolutionary thoughts, I want to think that we still live our daily life in the coordinates established by Immanuel Kant. According to him, time and space are present in all our experiences of spatial and temporal events, which cannot be perceived without spatial arrangements and temporal coordination, both as a priori categories or necessary preconditions of the possibility of experience. Space is the form of the outer sense. Time is the form of the inner sense. There is no doubt that all of us, as good readers of literature or film watchers, have witnessed other conceptions of time and space. Marcel Proust, Virginia Woolf, or James Joyce, with their use of a stream of consciousness. Julio Cortázar, who often manifested his hate for watches and other conventional measures of time. Borges, who played with all these two categories all his life. Kafka is probably the best example. In his short piece, A Common Conclusion, we read, a common experience resulting in a common confusion. A has to transact important business with B in H. He goes to H from a preliminary interview, accomplishes the journey there in 10 minutes, and the journey back in the same time, and on returning both to his family of his expedition. Next day, he goes again to H, this time to settle his business finally. As that, by all appearances, will require several hours, A leaves very early in the morning. But although all the surrounding circumstances, at least in A estimation, are exactly the same as the day before, this time it takes him 10 hours to reach H. When he arrives there, quite exhausted in the evening, he is informed that B, annoyed at his absence, had left half an hour before to go to H village, and that they must have passed each other on the road. A is advised to wait, but in his anxiety about his business, he sets off at once and hurries home. This time, A covers the distance without paying any particular attention to the fact practically in an instant. At home, he learns that B had arrived quite early, immediately after A's departure. Indeed, that he had met A on the threshold and reminded him of his business, but A had replied that he had no time to spare, he must go at once. In spite of this incomprehensible behavior of A, however, B has stayed on to wait for A's return. It is true, he had asked several times whether A was not back yet, but he was still sitting up in A's room. Overjoyed at the opportunity of seeing B at once and explain everything to him, A rushes upstairs. He's almost at the top when he stumbles, twists as you know, and almost fainting with the pain, incapable even of uttering a cry, only able to moan faintly in the darkness, he hears B, impossible to tell whether at a great distance or quite near him, stamping down the stairs in a violent rage and vanishing for good. That was fiction. But COVID-19 is real. What happened then with our perception of space and time during the pandemic and its obliged lockdown? There were changes, many important changes. The external world was reduced to the limit to our own house, not to talk to about those living in nursing homes, in which case it was reduced to the limits of one room, and the time became a repetition of constructed acts in order to be able, as a friend put it, to kill time, or as I want to think, in order to buy time until this whole nightmare will be a thing of the past. In the vacuum of complete uncertainty brought by the pandemic and subsequent lockdown, I started to feel disoriented in space and time, and in need of inventing new points of reference. I discovered, for example, that I was able to recognize the different days of the week based upon the different supplements of the New York Times. Monday, the sports section; Tuesday, the science section; Wednesday, the food section; Thursday, the glamour one; Friday, dedicated to film and art shows; Saturday, with no special section; and Sunday, as the usual voluminous newspaper with the literary and art review sections, plus some new ones like home and children supplements. What does it mean, this new empirical reality? These new perceptions of space and time. We all have a body that is transported through the space and keeps its identical form, although constantly aging, together with our mind identity, or at least that is what we want to think. Day after day, or as the Colombian poet says, las horas que día tras día son la vida. The hours that day after day constitute our life. A body provided of senses through which we interact with the external world. Well, I discovered that during the pandemic, that multiple sensorial interaction became mainly visual. The external world came to me by reading, as in the newspaper example, not only about what was going on out there, but also with its temporal container, the different supplements that punctuate the different days of the week. Also, I spent most of the time watching, not the natural world I could only have access through the windows, but watching the television screen, my cellular, my computer screen. The other senses were also there, of course, mainly the obsessional ratification that I was able to smell, that I have not lost the sense of smell, one of the horrifying signifiers of the virus. I was also able to taste, mainly in a period in which food became so important. Everybody turned into a cook, not to talk into an obsessional, experienced cleaner of our own houses. And we not only celebrated food and the rituals of its preparation, but also the arrival of the food via Amazon, Whole Foods, or any other provider, like a ship arriving to a desert island with monthly provisions. And that arrival was also accompanied by new rituals: to let the box or container stay outside for a while, to enter the food into the house, letting the container staying out of the house. All of these maneuvers follow by a laborious kind of Lady Macbeth's obsessively washing of our hands, singing, it was recommended, "Happy Birthday to You," for, if I remember right, around 20 seconds. I have to tell you that I tried to sing the song in Spanish, but the rhythm, the lyric, and the timing did not do the trick. We were still in possession of the sense of touch, although the hugs, the contact with other human bodies, was something we experienced not so often. On the contrary, the other became a threat that was mandatory to avoid, or at least to keep a distance, to protect from them, covering the face with one mask or two that were better than one was sometimes advised, to stand at the right distance, or to make him, her, or them magically disappear in the horizon of our surroundings, or maniacally erased by the cleaning ceremony following an outside walk or eventual distant encounter. I would like now to come back to the prevalence of seeing, watching during the lockdown. The well became two-dimensional, flat on the screen, in which I watched Don Fiore, the instructor of daily Tai Chi for seniors, that I practice every evening with my husband, or Nancy, the yoga instructor, or the Puerto Rican dancer and his team that I try desperately to imitate in their perfect salsa, cumbia, rumba, or other tropical dances. In that way, Don Fiore, Nancy, the Puerto Rican dancer, became part of my daily contact that ruled and trained my body through me watching them in the TV screen. But there are two other important visual experiences that I have never had before and that started to conform my daily routine and impact my mind and imagination. My hours awaken and even my dreams. I am talking about soap operas and Zoom conferences. One of my future projects is going to be to explore the world of soap operas, how they are made, they are craft, no art, another friend of mine said, and how insidiously and powerfully they infiltrate in our life thoughts, fantasies, and dreams. We watched many soap operas during this past year, coming from places as exotic as Turkey, with intrigues of love and money, as structured as Denmark and the complicated life of a female prime minister, as close as Mexico with its bandits and drug dealers, as familiar as Italy with its rewriting of Elena Ferrante's book, or Argentina and the arrival of European migration at the beginning of 20th century with the desire of far el America, and the reverse migration in the 70s and 80s of Argentines to Europe escaping the military government. Or soap operas centered in a main character, a woman with no luck in love, an adopted girl playing chess like a genius, many psychopaths, and several sex predators of different kinds. Among family and friends, a common topic of conversation was to ask what soap opera they were watching, if they recommend it or not, and if it was a shared experience, to discuss the plot, the characters. Fictional characters, plots, and intrigue invaded our lives, jumping from the screen into our living space, like some of Manuel Puig's novels or The Purple Rose of Cairo by Woody Allen. The serial strategy, with its combination of suspense, intrigue, and repetitive topics, made us witnesses, even protagonists of dramas as neurotic as Freud cases. The other new experience was to live in Zoom. My last doctoral student did, for our department, the first one, his defense by Zoom last year, with all of us, the members of the committee, coming in and out of the screen. I also attended, in this new world, many seminars from the Michigan Psychoanalytic Institute and other psychoanalytic associations, national, international, and I taught a couple of seminars to them. To teach a class through Zoom, as many of you still active teachers know very well, is a completely new experience. Week after week, with each of us showing there with longer hair and or of multiple different colors, most of the time with the same comfortable garments, always with a bottle of glass or glass of water or a mug of tea and coffee. I also attended many professional conferences, as I said. During these conferences, I discovered that they have their own semantics and syntaxes. All the faces horizontally displayed on the screen in a small group, or if there are many participants. The last conference I attended, the American Psychoanalytic Association, during the last 3 weekends, had grouped between 50 and 400 people. that you can scroll and get access to each and full of them, unless I discover that practice lately, that you decide to close your video and instead of seeing a face, people would be able to read your name, or in more sophisticated cases, to see a fixed photo replacing your alive face. In addition to the icons on the screen, the mute, unmute, the video, the yellow hand, or the chat line to put comments, etc. Talking about new iconographies, come to my mind now that there are also new topographies in the space. When we are able to go to a city, to go to the city, I live in an urban, in a kind of very with trees and big houses. Anyway, when you access to a city, silent and empty streets, gardens with signs saying thanks to health or essential workers, in addition to more recent ones saying Black Lives Matter. Rereading what I have written, I realize I only touch the most superficial, literally and symbolically, effects of the pandemic. What about the psychological effects? The strange nightmares, sometimes the same recurrent one, the insomnia, or the nights populated by past memories or present fears, the anxiety, the obsessional control of physical function and traits, fever, smell, the ability to breathe or not, forgetting or obsessively focus on a topic, a person, a real or imagined moral injury, and the constant conscious and unconscious competition with the others. At the beginning, to get the test, to be tested. More recently, about getting the first dose, the second dose of the vaccines. I want to mention briefly some of the strategies I developed to fight the pandemic situation. At the beginning, I reread or read for the first time books related to the topic. The beautiful La Peste, the Plague by Albert Camus, Nemesis, a new book for me about the polio in New York by Philip Roth, Love in the Time of Cholera by Garcia Marquez, or Blindness. I also watched the movie again, especially the first scenes are incredible, by Saramago. A bit later, I discovered a very interesting new reading, Wuhan Diaries, Dispatches from a Quarantine City by Fang Fang, where she describes the coronavirus explosion during the Lunar New Year, so important from Asian communities and Chinese in special, the collapse of the system, people walking from hospital to be admitted, their helplessness together with the complex feelings of guilt and self-shame. Her criticism of the Chinese government because of its slow start and disorganized response to the virus, the courage of the doctors and nurses, and the censorship of her writing on the part of the Chinese government, she says, all I could do was write. And so just kept writing and writing, it became my only psychological release. I don't think it's not necessary to make the correlation of the diaries and the brief notes about my reading of the diaries, what was going on in the United States at the same time. Another strategy was to continue writing some kind of autobiographical pieces in a series I call My Writers and I, in which, in different sections, I write about Cortázar and I, Puig and I, Borges and I, and other writers I have met, interviewed, written about, and in many cases had a close relationship. Two of those pieces have been read in the live writing group organized by Professor Arthur Marotti, in which a group of retired professors present and comment autobiographical pieces. In relation to more social and community enterprises, as a response to the other pandemic I mentioned, the political one, with its traits of racism, xenophobia, homophobia, and misogyny, I put together a panel on migration, exile, and psychoanalysis presented in November at the Michigan Psychoanalytic Association, a panel formed by me and two candidates of the Institute, one a psychiatrist from Sudan and the other a musician from Venezuela, both doing the training at the Michigan Institute. In the same direction, I started this past Monday a seminar on migration, exile, race, and psychoanalysis, in which race is added and readings go from Frank Fanon to Dorothy Holmes. As I wrote in the flyer, I made many discoveries during these times. Two were the text Intimations by Sadie Smith, the British author, currently a tenured professor of fiction at New York University, author of several novels and collection of short stories and essays, and a frequent contributor to the New Yorker and the New York Review of Books. Both are very, very short books and extremely thought-provoking. In the preface of Intimation, Sadie Smith writes, "There will be many books written about the year 2020, historical, analytical, political, as well as comprehensive accounts. This is not any of those. What I have tried to do is to organize some feelings and thoughts that events so far have provoked in me." And this was really, in part, is what I have been trying to do here, and I am going to continue doing, trying to expand this article, this presentation into an article. The other author I mentioned is Slavoj Žižek, author of another very short book, Pandemic COVID-19 Shakes the World. Zizek, a philosopher and cultural theorist who was a visiting professor at University of Michigan in 1988. I attended his presentation, a very complex one in which he combined Lacanian psychoanalysis, Marxist dialectics, and German philosophy. I have to confess that I don't remember too much about the talk, but I remember the man for sure, his energy, his seduction, his body mobility, and overall expressivity while he talked. In pandemic, we read, the coronavirus epidemic confronts us with two opposed figures that prevail in our daily lives. Those, like medical staff and caretakers, who are overworked to the point of exhaustion, and those who have nothing to do since they are forcible or voluntarily confined to their homes. Belonging to the second category, I feel obliged to use this predicament to propose a short reflection on the different ways in which we become tired. Zizek's explanation takes, of course, a very different direction than mine in this text. His political, socioeconomical, and cultural preoccupations have little to do with my ephemeral, unpretentious lines that I just shared with you. Although my talk is closer to the intention, at least, of Sadie Smith. Although Zizek called for tolerance and solidarity for immigrants unfairly rejected, imprisoned, or separated from their children in the border, US border, European borders, resonate inside of me. He also enumerates a list of rituals brought by the pandemic. And another contribution that I felt interesting in Zizek's book is how the stages that our perception of the pandemic took place. He talks denial, followed by anger, followed by bargaining, followed by depression, and later acceptance. I would like to close these notes emphasizing the power of creativity as a mental and physical therapy. And now I am going to mention last week when I attended the Humanity Center, the same place that is hosting me today, with a beautiful program on creative projects during the pandemic. Attending this function or this event, I had the confirmation of my conviction. Through songs, poems, dance, sound, architecture, and different performances, the best of the human spirit, resilience, and inventiveness came to the surface in, I mentioned some of the titles, Freedom of Speech in Specimen Bottles, or Pandemic Poetry American Version, or Fragile Forms of Comfort, or How to Move, or the last one, The Imitation of a Ventilator, from a sound composition made by a victim of the early phase of the pandemic. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you. So that concludes our presentation. Now we move to our Q&A portion of our brown bag. Feel free to raise your hand, unmute your mic, or post any questions in our chat box that we'll answer. So, all right.
I see Elena has her hand up, or is she just cheering?
I was just cheering, I was applauding, but I do have some questions. I think I need a minute to formulate a little bit. So I'll take that minute back.
Don't be too articulate, because probably you are going to have a not very articulate answer.
Well, then I'll just talk to get it started. I just wanted to thank you, Jorgelina, for a very articulate talk. Actually, you took us through the various stages of the pandemic. And I think you hit on so many aspects of how it has impacted us. I discovered Smith's book actually through you, because you mentioned it in the flyer, and I got it on Kindle and read it right away and enjoyed it immensely. And Zizek's book I had read a while back, and I found it not similar, but I think the enterprise, the book that he wrote, I'm not quite sure how to think about it. Like you, I quite don't remember what happened in that book. I have an overall sense, and it kind of made me think about it, because I read it, this is a very personal take on it, but I read it at the same time I read another short book. All these books are very short. They're reactions to the pandemic. I read another one by BHL, Bernard-Henri Lévy, the French philosopher. And I don't think that one has been translated. And they were both of them were very similar to the extent that I think they were just, people just needed to get their thoughts out. They're just reactive. And I was wondering for them, maybe this was just an opportunity to sort of like reiterate some of their previous ideas, because I felt for Zizek's book, it was just a reiteration of how he felt in general towards society. I didn't feel like he was saying a lot, there wasn't a lot of new material. So maybe that's why my reaction was to sort of like forget it all afterwards. So I'm not quite sure, how I feel about these books. At one point I was very critical, and I said, well, did these people just take advantage of the pandemic to just put some books out? And then I was relieved to find out that actually all the royalties from these books went to very good causes. I think Zizek donated everything to Médecins Sans Frontières, and Bernard-Henri Lévy donated to the Independent Librarians Association in France. So
Alina, yeah, I cannot agree more with you. I am an old-fashioned, so I need to purchase the books and have the book in my hand. You can see, because the diaries of Wuhan diaries, that was only an e-book initially. I think now, and I was able to read it, I have difficulties dealing with that. But going to your point, I think is, yeah, you are right. After I read Zizek's book, I was a bit angry for the money that I had bought, for the brevity of the book, for the repetition of one of his main approaches, recurrent approaches, and also from the sources. He was going to Wikipedia, he was going to, sources and quoting there and not elaborating. So And I also felt the relief when I knew the Les Médecins Sans Frontières, no, Doctors Without Borders, that he was giving the royalties to them. So I think, as I said, this need of autobiography pieces in many of us, these celebrities felt the need to express themselves. And I don't know the pragmatic part of that, taking advantage of the situation, I think is part of the whole thing. And the fact is that they let out some half-cooked pieces. But still, as I have the book with me and I read it, and I took most of what I presented to you, that it was not too much, to this distinction between people with all the time in their hands and people with none, as we know, especially firsthand, you know, people in Detroit, in the hospitals, all over the country and all over the world. So yeah, I am happy to hear, because I thought that I was getting a mixture of too suspicious and half paranoid. But yeah, I agree with your.
Thank you very much also for confirming, because one has a lot of doubts about oneself and how we read things during these times. I think the way you put it, half cooked, is perfect. And with that in mind, I have to admit that I started thinking differently about these pieces, sort of like I was critical of them, but yet at the same time, I was so interested in reading them, and they helped me get through some of the tough days. So perhaps the purpose, if there is a purpose, but the overall goal of these pieces is not necessarily to be so analytical or to be so comprehensive or fully
Or
date.
innovative, yeah.
Yeah, rather than just put something out there, because there is this obsessive need to express yourself, the need to be in touch with others through this expression of ideas, and also to help people get through the pandemic.
Yeah, I experienced that it was the need of solidarity, no? And I remember in one of the many Zoom conference I mentioned that I attended, there was Adriana Spengler, a psychoanalyst, Argentinian psychoanalyst, that moved to Venezuela before coming to Seattle. And I felt that we have a similar itinerary. You know, I moved, escaping from the military government, to Colombia, and after to the United States. And she said the same feeling of uncertainty of a foreigner experienced with the pandemic. But she said the difference is that in this, we are all in the same boat. And at the beginning, I couldn't agree more with that statement until I started to see that it's not true.
Yes.
That race and social class are big factors to determine how we are in the same boat or not exactly in the same boat. But this is a topic for another talk, no? Yeah.
Absolutely. I thank you very much for the talk. I'll just leave you with one thought, and maybe this is confirmed or not by your readings. I felt that while these books are extremely timely because they address the lockdown in France, the French authors really talked a lot about the lockdown. I also felt like they were so, because I'd read them, a few months ago, and these books were written in May. I felt they were already no longer referring to the current reality. So they're very perishable. They got old very, very quick, the French ones, because they were addressing a reality that was no longer relevant. Like we were already living in a different reality. And since you talked about time, I felt like time just shifted. So we're going through, chronology so fast that events that were relevant a month ago were no longer relevant. And I had never experienced a sense of a time shift like I did through this pandemic.
Thank you. Any other?
I see in chat, there's a question from John Michael Gruder. He says, years ago, I remember reading about Lacan, and you mentioned him as a psychoanalyst. Could you refresh me on what he said, and why do you consider him important to understanding this pandemic?
John, when I mentioned Lacan, John Michael, no? Yeah. When we were together on Friday. When I mentioned Lacan, it was related to the presentation of Zizek in 1998. But going to your question, I am Argentinian. I was born in Argentina, and Lacan was first translated to Spanish in Argentina, and there were some Lacanians there. So I give this original sin, let's say. When I was trained as an academic psychoanalyst in the Michigan Psychoanalytic Institute, they are mostly in the line of Freudian, post-Freudian, and British psychoanalysts, Melanie Klein, Winnicott, etc. So I have personally found that Lacan has helped me reading Lacan in French, because the translations are, Lacan is very tricky and sometimes unnecessarily complicated, probably, I don't know. But if you read translations, it gets much worse, much worse. So I found that as a literary critic, working with Puig, Manuel Puig, who says that modern novel starts with Freud, it was very useful. The mirror stage and the notion of archive, etc. If you mention Lacan in the United States, except some groups in California and some free groups in New York, or university groups like in Columbia University, Lacan is considered exile, especially with his notion of 5 minutes to 1 hour taking care of patients, and all of those arbitrary choices that go against the traditional frame of 45 minutes, the couch, etc., etc., etc. That, curiously enough, with the pandemic, all those frames are starting to change, because the analyst has to do analysis, psychotherapists, and so on, everything conducted through Zoom, where you can lay in the couch if you want, but still you have to face the analyst. Is not in the back there, and you are laying, and you don't know if he's sleeping, checking the phone, or really paying attention. You hope he's paying attention to you. So Lacan is a complicated topic, but I mention only trying to situate the talk of Zizek in '98, University of Michigan, when he was a visiting professor. Yeah.
there any other questions? I think Professor Corbatta was quite thorough in her examination of the relevant ideas and have made a very profound experience explicit to us. In fact, as she spoke, I saw myself in her words as the kinds of concerns that I had, and sort of sense of darkness becoming light, and then light becoming darkness, and then eventually after a particular time, which will go unmentioned, there seems to be light at the end of the tunnel, and we're now beginning to get our vaccine. She's lucky enough to have both of her doses, and then I think it was very, very, very good. So if there are no questions, I would want to thank Professor Corbatta Wing. I always forget the last piece of it, because for all those years I knew her as Jorgelina Corbatta.
Walter, I have to confess that I don't know where this Wing came. Wing is my husband, Jane Wing, but I don't know why suddenly somebody attached that wing. That, of course, I have nothing against that, but as you said, gives me a nominal new identity that I didn't choose.
I thought you'd gotten married again.
Yeah. And because, I attended Arthur Marotti, he organized a meeting on retirement, personal experience, or future expectation for the people who are going to retire soon. And one of the participants talked about the negotiations of a space that a couple had to do during the pandemic. Because we were confined, 2 people, or in some cases more than 2 if you have children, young people living at home, or parents, no? It's true, the negotiation we were obliged to do with the space and the time and the interaction in a place from which we couldn't, we could go out with all precautions, but basically we were confined in the same place all the time, no? So probably the wind came from there. It's a result of the pandemic.
All right, well, thank you so much. And before I give Kennedy the floor to give her final remarks, I want to remind people who are in this meeting that we have published in the chat the application for our Brown Bag series next year. The center is, next year is going to be the 26th year of the Brown Bag series. And we are very proud of this opportunity to provide a forum for people across the arts, the humanities, social sciences, and increasingly the medical sciences to share ideas that have humanistic import. So if you are interested in participating in this project, do fill out that form, even if you don't have a title quite yet, but you know what semester you'd like to present in, and the day, even if you don't know that, we will put you on our schedule and talk to you, contact you in due course. But thanks for coming. And Kennedy, can you?
Yes, first to our speaker, thank you so much for a well-crafted talk and being able to again facilitate some meaningful discussion. I think, like Dr. Edwards said, this is why we do what we do, giving you the floor and speaking on a topic that's so timely. I think it was important to give you that platform. And again, we do have applications for next year, so we would love for you to come back and give us a new perspective, maybe. But as a small token of our gratitude and on behalf of the Humanities Center, we do have 2 gifts for you. We have a journal and a mask with our logo on it. Yeah, that we hope you wear with pride, and we would love to give this to you in person. But because of COVID, we will be reaching out to all of our speakers towards the end of the school year to safely get these gifts to you. But again, thank you so much, and thank you to our audience for coming. This was a great talk, and we are just so fortunate.
I want to thank you for helping me to put the flyer together, from Walter to be such a good host as always, and for all the people that attended. And I would love some of them to voice their ideas, but probably I am going to learn later on. And thanks so much for the gifts.
You're welcome. So this talk has been recorded as well. So if you wanted to go back, or if you missed anything, of course you can reach out to our speaker via email, but this video and recording will be posted towards the end of the week. But thank you all for coming, and enjoy the rest of your day and enjoy this good weather. All right, everyone have a good one.